Good afternoon, everyone. It is Tuesday, October 19th, and I'm here for another live. And this week, I was going to talk about sort of how the uh, pandemic has affected criminal cases. And, this came from an article that I've read that tracked crime statistics in several large states across the United States and, trying to determine what effect, if any, COVID had on that. And I'll talk about that a little bit, but I was just also going to talk about how it's still affecting, has affected, and, may continue to affect us. So, as far as affecting crime statistics in Galveston County, I think we only saw a dip in the very beginning when we had, basically massive shutdowns. I know that there were local agencies were given directives, not to arrest people for petty offenses unless, there was some extenuating circumstance. And the reason behind that, I believe, was because they didn't want the pandemic spreading through the jail and they wanted to limit exposure as much as possible. So in the beginning, when we had that situation, you saw a lot of petty crime not being charged as much. I remember from back then watching body cam footage of officers and sometimes the accused being concerned about being within 6 feet of a suspect, or the suspect demanding that the officers give him his 6 feet. Uh, we've pretty well moved on from all that uh, in society in general, I guess. But we definitely don't see it in criminal defense much here in Galveston County anymore. The effects that we're kind of still dealing with, and I don't know, what that's going to continue to look like, is pretty much all the courts we have a trial backlog because there was a period of time when it was irresponsible to have a lot of people in the courthouse and certainly not to have jury trials, and so we could not have any, which means that trial cases just kept backing up and backing up. And so there are some courts that have a trial backlog through no fault of their own, just because the volume of cases that were basically unable to be dealt with because of the pandemic. As a result, during the height of the pandemic, our district attorney's office was pretty good about working out cases that could be worked out, uh, and getting people either out on bond or pled so that, to reduce the jail population. So a lot of the cases that, my office has currently sitting on trial dockets are all serious offenses, where people are potentially facing a very large amount of time. And so while the delay is certainly uncomfortable, uh, it's not necessarily affecting some of my clients because of the nature of the charges that they're facing, um, and the potential sentences that could result. So I don't, people ask me all the time on new hires, how long I think their case is going to take to get to resolution. And, at this point, we just don't have an answer because I don't know when we'll ever get back to, normal operations in the courthouse. The courts have resumed jury trials here, but we still can't pack people into, the jury assembly room like we used to. So basically, they've split up the dockets where, this court can pick a jury on Monday, but then the next court can't pick a jury until Tuesday, Wednesday, and so on. And so, whereas before we literally might have three courts in the courthouse and trial at the same time, because we could pack all those people into a jury assembly room and end up with several jury panels going to each court for their individual jury selection. Because of the pandemic, we're still not able to do that, so they've made the jury assembly room socially distanced and whatnot, but what that results in is only one court being able to use that facility at a time, which means that we don't have multiple trials going on in different courts, until and unless we get to a point that we can utilize that space again as we did before. The courts are now still making room for the jurors to be socially distanced. Right before the last call it wave of COVID or spike in the numbers, which was, before the fire that affected the courthouse, there were two courts that had their juries sitting back in the jury box like normal. And in those cases that I'm aware of, the judge of each court asked each juror individually if they were comfortable with that, and made it clear that if they were not, they could be spread out or distanced. But in the trials that I'm aware of, the juries back then all said, no, I'm fine, let's go sit in the jury box like normal. Now that we're coming back out of that wave, I don't know what it's going to look like until it starts happening again. We just continue watching the daily numbers, I guess, like anybody else, to see what's going to happen. It's the same way with in-session court right now. There are some courts that allow people to appear in person. There are some courts that prefer not to have courtrooms full of people, and we just have to know which court is taking what position all the time so we can properly inform our clients. There are, on the opposite side, there are courts right now issuing bond forfeitures for people that don't appear. On the other hand, there are some courts that are not, depending upon the attorney's communication with the client and communication with the court regarding the client. We have had several instances where we've had positive clients, but they were able to get us medical documentation that we presented to the court, and of course the court accepted it and did not make that person appear, which is obviously what we're hoping for, because if I have a COVID positive client, I don't want them to come to court because I don't want to be around them. So that's, I don't think I've heard of any court forcing someone to come to the courthouse that had proof of a positive COVID test. I think there was an issue with one court where someone showed up maybe with symptoms or a temperature, because they still take our temperature when we walk in every day. I think there was a court that did require a defendant to go upstairs because I guess there was some suspicion the defendant was trying to get out of something. I'm not sure. It wasn't my client. I have had a client who was denied entry to the courthouse for, I wasn't clear whether he had a high temperature or, they basically ask you three questions. Have you had any symptoms? Have you been in touch with anyone who had any symptoms? And I forget the other question. So I had a client either answer one of those affirmatively or get a high temperature. So the deputies in the front doing security radioed up to the bailiff of that court and let them know that my client was being denied entry because of, COVID screening. And so they told him to leave, and obviously the judge let me get that individual a new court date because, again, from what I can tell, the county is trying to be as proactive as possible in keeping everyone safe. But again, since we had gotten to the point before the last spike that everything was normal, or not normal, certain judges were trying to get back to as much as normal as possible. Then we had that big spike. I don't know, now with flu season coming up, what's it going to look like? How do you know if we will or won't have another spike? The Delta variant is what I keep. Not, the last spike was the Delta variant, which I guess was a variant. So it's hard to say. And so when people want to know, how has COVID affected the criminal justice system? Well, I think in the very beginning, before everyone knew what to do or how to deal with it, and hadn't started practicing social distancing and everything, there was a slight decrease in certain arrests of petty crimes. Definitely not the big crimes. They were still being arrested and jailed. But now that part has got back to normal. As I said, courts have now again started jury trials in Galveston. So it's moving forward, I guess is the best way to say it. Each court is trying to hone down on their trial cases and what is actually going to go to trial so that we don't waste any potential jurors' time, our time. We're just, I guess you could say the courts are being selective about which cases are being tried. It's sort of the opinion that the more important cases need to be tried because they've been waiting for so long, and then obviously the people in custody need to be tried because they've been in custody so long waiting for this trial. And being in custody does cost the county money per prisoner. So whether a person is released because of their innocence, or on bond, or if they move on to another facility like prison, the jail likes it when people leave because it stops costing the county money. So, the answer to the question, how long will it take us to get back to normal court operations? I don't know. I don't even have a very creative answer on how we clear out the dockets that are existing because, like I said, from what I can tell, at least in my practice, there are not a lot of garbage cases on the trial docket. They're all cases that need to be tried to a jury. And so we just have to keep going like this till we can get through these trials, and then hopefully by then we will have gotten rid of the backlog. So like I said, I started this because I read an article about crime statistics in other major cities and how it affected and many reduced their, for instance, drug charges because people were forced to be on lockdown. And like I said, we experienced some of that in Galveston County way back when, but I think we're back to normal now as far as number of arrests and whatnot. But that's all I got for this week. Hope y'all have a good week, and I will see y'all next week.